evidence and the fact that we're dealing with historical evidence rather than that which can be tested and repeated, but there is a significant amount of evidence, and we want to know what that is. We looked in our last session at the first two in the rungs of the ladder that lead to modern man according to the evolutionary textbooks, beginning with Australopithecus, leading to Homo erectus, then to Neanderthal, and to modern man is the general picture that's presented. There are a few extras that we'll look at as well. We saw that the overwhelming evidence for Australopithecus was that they were apes. And if you have questions about that, we'd encourage you to go back and look at the archive where those lessons can be found. Homo erectus, likewise, is not evidence for evolution. They are good men, people not unlike ourselves, as Mary Leakey put it. And so we see apes and we see men, and that's not a picture of evolution. It's a picture of exactly what the creationist would expect. We introduced the idea of Neanderthal as you don't really need that much of an introduction. Everybody knows about that. Maybe you've been called a Neanderthal. This is the epitome of halfway between apes and men, and supposed to be evidence for evolution. Well, we look at the representations in the textbooks, and boy, that looks pretty much like an ape man, doesn't it? That would scare the living daylights out of you if you met that in the back alley. This is the restoration that was produced by Marcellin Buell. Shortly after the time of Darwin, he was thoroughly convinced and was restoring this to look like what he expected, half ape, half man, as Darwin had predicted. He did a terrible job of restoration. In fact, William Howells of Harvard said that the ankle bones were on backwards, so that by all laws of physics he should have fallen on his face. But this stereotype is absolutely not an accurate picture. Updating that, notice the statement by Ian Tattersall, who's head of the Department of Anthropology at the American Museum of Natural History. This is not a lightweight. This is not a creationist. This is an evolutionist. But he says the recognition, finally, that the stoop-shouldered, bent-kneed stereotype of these humans created by Marcellin Buell is totally false. Now, one of the leading authorities says this, that's in the textbooks, is not an accurate picture. Matt Cartmill, likewise not a lightweight, president of the American Association of Physical Anthropology, says, I tend to think the Neanderthals, had fully human language. After all, they had larger brains than those of most humans. Did you know that? No, we are smaller in brain capacity than the Neanderthals, which is not a fact often presented. In the proceedings of the Academy of Sciences just a few years ago, they decided to sequence the proteins that they were able to obtain from some of the Neanderthal skulls. This one from the Shandar cave in Iraq. The team found the Neanderthal sequence was the same as modern humans. Well, that's certainly not what was expected, but larger brained, the same proteins as we have. Professor Trikos, who is considered as indicated here on the website of the Washington University by many the world's most influential scholar of Neanderthal biology and evolution. If you want to know the bottom line, the real facts, this is probably the leading scholar in the world. In Live Science, just a few years ago, he says, or they quote him, Trikos says he had not seen evidence of any kind of difference, whether biological or social, between humans and Neanderthals. Now, is that what you're told in the textbooks? Biological or social, no difference between humans and Neanderthals. Here in 2014, New Scientist, he says enough of the cheap jibes, Neanderthal may have been just as clever as modern humans. And so if you're called a Neanderthal, maybe that's not an insult at all. They had bigger brains. In fact, we all have Neanderthal DNA, we're told. Here from Scientific American, Neanderthal genome persists in the gene pool of people today. Between 35 and 70%, we're told, have Neanderthal DNA. And here from this year, in Science, the gene flow with Neanderthals exists in all modern humans. So where's the evidence that there's something different here? When you get all of the facts together, we're looking at humans. We do see some variations, and I think our Creator liked variety. But here from Scientific American, the suggestion is that the switching on and off of genes could have distinguished between moderns. Now, the term modern is, of course, I think, prejudicial toward the issue of evolution. Europeans get to be moderns. Those that are not European are not quite so modern, and I'm sure we can see the racial implications of that. But we have learned in the last decade that the epigenome can trigger the turning off and turning on of genes due to environmental influences. The information is already there. It's just switched on and switched off by a very complex control mechanism, the epigenome. And that may be what accounts for some of the variation that we see in the world today. We see some that maybe in our prejudicial view look different. I took a picture of this fella on a flight to Turkey not too long ago. I think he may have been switched off or on, depending on what you consider normal. But the picture that we see here is being refuted in Science News here in 2018. They have an unwarranted image as brutish and uncaring. The study by the University of New York reveals that Neanderthal health care, and they're talking about the use of penicillin and aspirin, was seen as compassionate and knowledgeable response to injury and illness, challenging our notions that they were brutish. Now that needs to be challenged, and it's not by a creationist even, it is by some of the leading authorities in the field of science today. Here from Science 2018, additionally, we're told they voyaged to remote islands. Now we're talking about seafaring Neanderthals. That's a pretty stunning change compared to this brute that couldn't stand up straight. These were very sophisticated people. It's just a matter of how it's restored. And we see modern people that look similar, and certainly the same configuration of the skull. This individual was actually, they were trying to do some insulting, but they were pointing out that the skull structure of this Russian wrestler, who was a bright and very capable individual, nevertheless configured very precisely to the typical Neanderthal configuration. We've learned fairly recently that the Neanderthals, as we're told here by ABC News, may be in need of a makeover. Scientists say at least some of these extinct hominids could have had fair skin and red hair. Well, I'm not so sure they're extinct, except that the DNA is still in our DNA. But they had not this brutish, dark, hairy look, fair skin and red hair, which is not the way it's normally depicted. And of course, even fair skin and red hair, you can make that look brutish, but you can make it look otherwise. Comparing it with the configuration of some of the faces today in a more favorable way here, Julianne Moore fits exactly, and she's got fair skin and red hair and fits the configuration perfectly. But of course, National Geographic, when they do their restorations, they did try to put in fair skin and red hair, but Wilma didn't come out looking quite as good as Julia, I think reflecting the prejudice, a very dirty face, and she needs some cosmetics, doesn't she? Well, Neanderthals had that. As we are told here at the BBC World News, this is the first secure evidence for their use of cosmetics. To me, it's the smoking gun that kills the argument once and for all. Bury this view of Neanderthals as half-wits here. professor from Bristol University. Of course, National Geographic hasn't buried their view of half-wits, producing this support for the racist concept of some more primitive and some more advanced. I think they're all good people. The Creator loved variety, and these were capable people and probably good-looking people. Interestingly, they were very musical and made flutes with the same scale that we have today, the do-re-mi scale. Now, maybe you could take a bear bone, and that is from a bear, and put holes in there so that it makes sound like a flute and comes out with a do-re-mi scale. I don't think I could do that. In fact, I know I couldn't do that. But the Neanderthals could and did. Summarizing the evidence for the Neanderthals, we see that they were unquestionably Homo sapien, according to Richard Leakey. They had a ridiculous reconstruction, should have fallen on its face with ankle bones backwards. As we pointed out in the previous lesson, we find moderns actually, modern again in quotes here, the European, below the Neanderthal. I don't think one's more modern than the other, but racist scientists will sometimes imply that. They spoke human language. They had a brain that was larger than ours. It's gone downhill since then. The same proteins. We have overlapping DNA even in our DNA. They were religious. They were buried with religious ceremony, flowers. They were musical. They had fair skin and red hair, and they used cosmetics. They used medicine, aspirin and penicillin, and they were seafaring. What does that look like to you? That doesn't look like an ape man. That looks like a good man, but one that fills the role that the evolutionist predicts. They just, like the ugly stepsister, shove that foot into the glass slipper whether it fits or not. This foot doesn't fit that picture. It's a picture of creation and the variety that the Creator appreciates. Neanderthals were men. So we've got Australopithecus, we've got Homo erectus, we've got Neanderthal. Apes, we got men. Where is the indication of evolution? Apes and men. That's what we have today. That's what we had in the fossil record. Now, honest scientists look at this and say, wait a minute, this evidence is crumbling. Bernard Wood, professor of human origins, George Washington University, is a devout evolutionist. But he says, even with all of the fossil evidence from the past 50 years, Neanderthal, the Homo erectus, and Lucy wouldn't go quite back that far, but all of that evidence, a convincing hypothesis for the origin of Homo remains elusive. We don't have a convincing picture. Now, you might imagine I say that, but this is one of the leading authorities in the subject saying, no, it's not. And you can see why. It's not because he wants to say that, but that's the evidence. But that's not the picture that's presented in the textbooks. What is presented, I think, is rather shameful. More recently, let me give you an example. Here from Science News, they're reporting this great display that they have at the Perot Museum in Dallas. For the next few months, the Perot Museum it is going to be dedicated to meeting our extended family, the ancient ancestors of man. Now, there's nothing about Neanderthal, about Homo erectus, nothing about those things that are supposed to have. That's pretty well crumbled according to the. But now then, we've got some to take their place. And so in the $185 million Perot Museum, which beautifully displays all kinds of evidence, great dinosaur displays, and the children, of course, very much intrigued. They have this brochure which advertises, now they're going to tell you about origins, and they have ancient human ancestors that reflects on what it means to be human. And so here's the promotion for months here at the museum. Another page of the brochure says it's one of the greatest fossil discoveries of the past half century, and they have two examples that now are going to give you some evidence. We don't worry about Neanderthal. That's a different story. About Australopithecus, Homo erectus, that's the old story. Now then, here is the great discovery, and they're talking about Australopithecus sediba and Homo naledi. Let me introduce you to these, and this is, of course, their restoration and what's presented in the museum, but what they leave out are the peer-reviewed, the actual data, the description in the literature of these individuals that belie what's presented in the museum. Here from Science, where that was originally described, they point out that you got 15,000 bones they found, so there's no lack of evidence here. They say it came from 15 individuals, probably a pretty good analysis, but you got a real jigsaw puzzle putting it together. But what do you find when you put it together? Well, one of the problems that they acknowledge in the article that they do not tell you about, absolutely tell you the opposite in the Perot Museum, is they were unable to determine an age. Now, from my experience in dealing with these people, what that means is the age that they found, that and obviously tried to date it, but it didn't come out as they wanted, and so they were unable to date it. So maybe it was last year, well, probably not last year, but maybe 100 years ago, maybe 1,000 years ago. Who knows? They were unable, at least they're not going to tell you the dates. The sloped face, very robust mandible, big like the ape, bears little resemblance to humans. Now, the Perot Museum says precisely the opposite. A small cranium, phalanges, fingers of the hand were even more curved than Australopithecus afarensis, that's Lucy. Now, they try to put it in that category, but this is even more ape-like, more curved, little resemblance to humans, suggesting an ape-like creature. They don't have that in the museum. This is the peer-reviewed scientific data, and they've recognized that what's been presented in the textbooks doesn't work too well, so now they're going to come up with that which really proves the point. Come pay your $20, go through the museum, and see your ancestor. Well, it's an ape-like creature that bears little resistance to humans according to the scientific data. That doesn't threaten faith, does it? The next, and there were two that they had in the museum. The next one is Australopithecus sediba. This was found back in 2008, and now then presented in Science. A good bit of this journal is dedicated to this description, and I think they need to read what it says. It looked like, that is, the foot looked like that of an extinct ape, which is what they have on the cover. A tiny brain, a chimp-sized body, similar to the hands of apes that climb trees. It came with a long primitive arm. There's an evolutionary prejudicial term, primitive. It had a long arm like an ape, is the actual data, suggesting that it often hoisted itself up into trees. The heel is very primitive, again, the evolutionary prejudice. It looks like an ape. The skeletons and their analysis convince few. No one's redrawing their family trees. Well, that was in 2008. But now then they got to have something to replace the crumbling tree, and this is the best they've got. And so why do they use what looks like an extinct ape with a tiny brain, a chimp-sized body, primitive ape-like arms and heels and legs, where the experts say nobody's putting this in the family tree? Why do they use that? Because they don't have any better example. This is the best they've got. And so for months you see, here's your ancestor. Go look Pay your $20 and go in and see this. Science Advances commented on the actual result, and that's just less than about a year ago. Temporal evidence shows Australopithecus subata is unlikely to be the ancestor of Homo. And so they took everything down at the museum. Don't count on that. And they don't tell you about this. They hope you can't read the actual literature. The Perot Museum is continuing to say, together, these two remarkable discoveries provide further evidence for the complex, nuanced processes of human evolution. Here's the best evidence they got. And it's apes. Notice what they continue to say in this journal. The issue of the origin of Homo. This is just last year. The issue of the origin of Homo is one of the thorniest questions in paleoanthropology. Well, you look at the textbooks, that was settled years ago. Not really. It's one of the thorniest questions in paleoanthropology, one that has led to a myriad of proposals, sometimes speculations. Talk about an understatement. Answers to the question of how, when, and where the earliest representatives of our genus emerged are still in flux. Not according to the Perot Museum and not according to the textbooks, but this is what the leading expert says, owing especially to the dearth of the fossil data. I think we can summarize the evidence this way. We look at apes. You go to the zoo, you go to the ape barn, and you see a significant variety. Our Creator loves variety. We see some of this in the fossil record. Some of them have become extinct, don't exist today, but there is a variety of ape-like creatures in the fossil record, which is what we would expect. More in the past than we have now, but what we have shows a variety. We look at humans, and likewise, we see some that are different from ourselves, and you may think some of them look strange, and some of them do look a little different and strange, but that's our prejudice working. These are good people. I think they're created in the image of God. I think they're all children of Eve. That's the creationist viewpoint. The evolutionist viewpoint says, no, some of them are a little more primitive than others. Some are not quite as bright and advanced, and so you see the prejudice reigning and racism stimulated. What we see in the living world today is a variety of humans, a variety of apes, but perfect apes and perfect humans. And in between, you see a lot of shoehorning, you see a lot of foolishness, or as Dwayne Gish used to say, you take a little incus opus, a little hocus pocus, and you come up with Pithecus spoofus. That's what's in between. Oh, they may advocate it at the Perot Museum, the $185 million museum that says, here's our ancestors. But then you look at the data, they're apes. Pithecus spoofus. When you look at the evidence for fossil men, you see obvious evidence in favor of creation. The pitiful evidence is crumbling and exposed in the literature as apes and men with Pithecus spoofus in between, which is the same picture that we saw when we looked at the fossil record. This is just the second stanza of the same song, distinct, separate, right from the beginning, according to the evolutionist. Now, in the time that remains, let me just make one more point that we made as we were talking about race on this program several months ago. Darwin's book, Origin of the Species by Natural Selection, is only a portion of that title. And Preservation of Favored Races was the actual title and reflects his racist view, which is absolutely disgusting. Quoting here from a letter to William Graham, looking to the world at no distant date, what an endless number of the lower races will have been eliminated by the higher civilized races throughout the world. Now, that would get him crucified in today's society. I'm not sure that's an appropriate view. I believe it is. This is disgusting. Stephen Gould acknowledged the effect of Darwin's thinking. He says arguments for racism may have been common before 1840, but they increased by orders of magnitude following the acceptance of evolutionary theory. Pervasive racism of white scientists looked at their own children for comparison with normal behaviors in lower races. This is what happened as a result of Darwinism. This is the root of the problem. Not the only explanation, but certainly a major impetus. We'd like for you to consider this evidence. Look at the facts, follow the truth. We hope you'll be with us next Sunday. Thank you for listening.